Hello and welcome to Katrina's Creations. This is our Wednesday episode, and this is going to be an Ask Me Anything segment. Actually, it's going to be two because you guys asked me several questions. I think I have a total of 13 questions. I have a total of 13 questions. But one of the questions, that was the one by Yoka, that one's going to take a little bit more time. It could be a segment all by itself, so that's what I'm going to do. And that was a question she asked about the plain people that live in our area, which would be predominantly the Brethren, the Mennonite, and the Amish, and what their crafts are, and a little bit about that. So that is going to actually be next Wednesday's segment. So Yoka, I am getting to it. It's just going to be, there's a lot to talk about with that, so I want to make it a segment all by itself. So let's jump right in. You guys sent me some questions, so let's get started. Question number one comes from Melissa Kreider, and her question was, what is my favorite brand of yarn? The cheap kind. I actually don't have a favorite brand, but what I like doing is when we go on vacation, I like to get yarn, sort of like souvenir yarn. I like to buy yarn from the local dyers to that area. So when I go into a yarn shop when we're on vacation, I'll look around, but one of the first things I'll ask the owner is, do you have a local dyer that you have yarn for? And so, like I said, it's kind of like souvenir yarn, because then I can look at that and go, oh, I bought that when I went so-and-so, went to, whatever place. So that would be what I would say as far as my favorite type of yarn. Pretty much anything soft. My favorite weight of yarn, I would have to say, is fingering. Sometimes worsted, between worsted and fingering, but I would tend to say fingering is my favorite. Just because I like working with that size needle. It's more comfortable for my hands. I don't like big chunky needles. They tend to hurt my wrists. So question number two is from Diane Luther, and it is, how do we plan our vacation? How do we choose where to go? And what are Dave's interests, or is he just along for the ride? So we plan vacations, pretty much I plan for vacation. Dave would be a happy homebody. But we do, in fact, he's walking very quietly in the other room because he knows I'm filming. Usually he kind of leaves it up to me, but I do get some suggestions from him. And we plan it all on the internet. I generally go on to an area that we're looking at going to, or a state we're looking at going to, and I look to see what the attractions are in the area, and we kind of base where we go or where we stay based on what we want to see once we go there. I actually did a video a long time ago on how I plan my vacations, but if you click there's a little letter I here. If you click that, that'll take you over to that video, and you can see how we go about planning vacations. We do it on the cheap. I have found just some little tips. If you book your vacation on the internet, the further ahead you book, the cheaper it is. If you stay midweek instead of the weekend, it's cheaper. And I mean, Dave and I do not stay in 4-star hotels by any means. We tend to go for the economy. And a lot of times, if you stay in mom and pop places instead of chain hotels, it's a little bit cheaper as well. I would advise you go on to TripAdvisor and check out the reviews very closely before you stay someplace. Make sure they have good reviews and they do not have bed bugs, because we live on the East Coast, and the corridor from Washington, D.C. up to like Boston there's a lot of problems with bed bugs. We've never run into it in any of the times we've gone. When we go on vacation, we don't tend to go south, only because we both grew up going south. My grandparents lived in Florida, and Dave's relatives, not his parents, but his relatives lived down in North Carolina. So we both grew up going south all the time. So we tend to go north Anyway, as far as Dave's interests, he's not just along for the ride. He gets interested in history. He likes to look at like pawn shops, and he likes to look at coins and collecting and stuff like that. So we try to find things that he's going to be interested in too. So I try to get us to stay places where there's stuff for him, stuff for me. We both enjoy history, so we try to find things that are historic as well. And that brings us to the next question, which is from Chris Bragg, which is, what is my favorite? What is my dream vacation? I have two. If I was to take my dream vacation outside of the U.S., I would love to go over to the UK. I'd like to do a grand tour of Europe and see the UK and Ireland and Scotland, and then go over and see Germany and all of the countries over there. And I would love to go up on one of those river cruises up the Mosel River and see the Rhine Palace and the Rhine River, I guess, and see the palaces and stuff. That just, the pictures I've seen are beautiful. My parents have done that and really enjoyed it. So yeah, I would like that. That would be my out of the U.S. trip. If I was to do my dream vacation in the U.S., it would be to do a grand circle. I would love to go north and go all the way across the country, all the way up to the northwest, like to Oregon and Washington, and then go down through California and see Big Sur along the coastline there, which I've always heard is so pretty, and Carmel by the sea and all those things, and then come back across the south part of the United States and see things along there and like see the Grand Canyon and all of that. I have gone as far west as Colorado. When I was a kid, we drove out to Colorado, and my grandparents had a cabin out there for the summer in Estes Park, which is just outside the Rocky Mountains, and we stayed there for 2 weeks. So we did that when I was 13, something like that. It was really pretty. But that's as far west as I've ever been. So I would love that. That would be my dream vacation for the U.S. Number 4. This is from Spring Noelker. Can I walk and knit? I could, but I would probably trip and impale myself like a giant shish kebab. So no, I don't. I don't walk and knit. I do ride in the car. I started to say drive and knit, but I don't drive. If I'm in the passenger seat, I'm usually knitting. I can crochet in the car a little bit, but I tend to get car sick easy because I have to look down a lot more. Where knitting, for the most part, I don't have to watch what I'm doing, so I'm okay with it. So if I'm in the car, I tend to knit more than crochet in the car, but not while I'm driving. So now we are on to, let's see, question number 5. This is from Cheryl Hemming, and it is, what is my favorite crochet hook? So I have one right here. This is like I have the old boy crochet hooks, they're like metal all the way across. I still have some of those, but I never use them. Ever since I found these rubber handled ones, I use them constantly just because they're really comfortable, and they have like a flat side right here. So it makes it really easy and comfortable to hold. And I have a whole set of these, and I got these off of eBay. I know that you can buy like sets other places. Check eBay. They're identical. I don't think they're any different. And these have like no name, but I know that I got an entire set. I'm thinking there was around 8 crochet hooks. It was under $10. So, yeah, that's the type I use. They don't have a name. They're just off of eBay. So, yeah, that's my favorite crochet hook. And while we're at it, I thought I would talk about what my favorite knitting needles are. And they're the ones that you see me use on all of the podcasts because I have several sets of these. Again, these are from eBay. I think I got a set of 11 knitting needles for maybe $5 to $8. That's not a piece. That's all 8 for that price. They come from China. I think they are supposed to be copies of like Chow Gu. but I love them. They are easy to use. They have nice joins right here. So they are not, you know, they don't catch or anything. They're just very smooth to use. The cables are nice on them. You know, sometimes you get cables that want to hold the memory, and so they kind of like are like trying to knit with coiled up springs. These don't do that. Like I said, they're cheap knitting needles. I don't own any expensive knitting needles. I have a couple sets of ChiaoGoo, but they weren't really pricey. I mean, they're a moderate size, kind of average price. I think you can get a set for $7 to $8. You know, I know there's expensive ones out there. There's the Luca or Leica needles, whatever, that were very popular there for a while. And everybody was buying them. And I know there's signatures, which run almost $50 a set. No, thank you. I'd be heartbroken if something happened to them. I go for the cheap ones, and they do just as good a job. I don't need something expensive. You know, I like these. I do not like really pointy needles because I will poke myself with them. These are nicely rounded on the tips. I have not found that they wear down. I have had some of the old boy needles that do have the really coiled spring or cords that are coiled like springs. And from using them, I did notice after a while the edges almost flattened out on some of them. These have not done it, and I've used them for several years now. So, yeah, those are my favorite knitting and crochet needles. Charlene Beelman is question number 6, and she asked, how do you care for your needles and hooks? I really don't do a whole lot of anything with them, other than keep them dry. You know, don't set them in an area like a basement or something where they are damp, because whether they're wood or whether they're metal, the wood ones can kind of swell a little bit. The metal ones can rust. I have had some needles before someone gave me, and I actually had to throw them out because I don't know what happened to them, but they were almost like corroded. And I tried filing the edges on them, and it never worked. Every time I tried to use them, they would snag everything I was working on. So, you know, I have seen needles get rust on them. So, you know, make sure you store them in a dry place, and that would be for the wood or for the metal knitting needles or crochet hooks. You know, other than just wiping them down, the metal ones, that's about all you have to do with them. Now, the wood ones, you do have to use a little bit more care. You don't want to store them, like I said, in a damp place, but you also don't want to store them in a hot or dry place like an attic, because just like any wood, it's going to dry out. You can end up with some splinters and rough edges on wood needles. All I do when that happens is I just use a little bit of sandpaper or an emery board, you know, like what you file your fingernails with, and just lightly go over it and smooth it out. You can do the same thing if the needle points are not as sharp as you want them to be. You can use a little sandpaper or an emery board and just sharpen them up a little bit. So I have used those before when I've gotten, you know, every so often the wood will split, especially the bamboo ones can, you know, they can splinter a little bit. So I just file them a little and they're okay. And I guess if they did seem like they were dry, you could use like a drop or two of like olive oil. Just make sure you rub it in really good so it doesn't end up on your fabric of what you're knitting or crocheting with. But that would be the only care I would have with any of them. For the most part, I don't have to do a whole lot with them. Beverly Simmons asks, who taught me how to knit and crochet? My mother actually taught me to knit and to crochet. My mother is more of a crocheter than she was a knitter. She has a knitting machine, but when I was a child, I was in Girl Scouts, and one of the badges was it was like a handicrafts. I forget the name of the badge, but it was like a handicrafts or something. You had to learn some knitting and crocheting. I remember crocheting 4 little squares and hooking them together and having a little pot holder. And so my mom taught me the basics of crochet and how to do like a granny square, you know, that type of thing. But I never had gone beyond that. And then she also taught me to knit. But if you remember the sweater that I finished, that she had started years ago and I finished and gave to her, or, well, actually I haven't given it to her yet. It's still sitting here at the house. But anyway, I was kind of surprised when I saw that because I don't remember my mother ever really knitting other than doing garter stitch. And that's the only stitch she ever showed me was garter stitch. And when I first started, I kind of gave up with knitting for years because I knitted triangles. I would start with something this big and it would end up this big because I would end up adding and dropping stitches. I knitted a lot of triangles. And so I didn't fool with knitting for years. And then at one of the churches we were at, there was a lady who was an avid knitter. And so she and I were talking one day, and this has probably been it's been 23, 24 years ago. And so she showed me a little bit more because I noticed her knitting in stockinette, which is this stitch, which is nice and smooth. And all I'd ever known was garter. And I was like, well, why does your knitting look smooth and mine doesn't? And that's when she explained to me the difference between knitting and purling and how to do the stockinette stitch. So from there, I started going to the library and getting videos out on knitting and learned how to do cable stitches and all the different stitches that way. This is prior to DVDs. I would get the VHS tapes and watch those, and that's how I learned to knit. Crocheting, like I said, my mom also showed me that, and then I didn't pick up crocheting a whole lot for years until just a year and a half ago. Jean Horn asked, and this question kind of leads right into it, how long have I been knitting and crocheting? I've been knitting, like I said, I started it when I was a child, and then I sat it aside until I was an adult. So I have been knitting roughly 23 to 24 years. And crochet, I again did as a child. I did it when we were first married too. I remember finishing up an Afghan for my parents that I made it, but it was all granny squares. It was all different shades of green, which matched their living room at the time. And I made it for Christmas for them one year. And over the years, I just did basic stitches. I made an Afghan for our bed one time, but it was just basically going back and forth and back and forth. And I think it was all double crochet, something like that. And so I knew the basics, but I didn't really pick up and do a whole lot with it. That has only been the last year and a half. So number 9 is from Susie Pop's Creation, and she has an Etsy shop. And if you've seen on some of the show and tell, she's been making project bags. So she asked, what is the best size project bag? And do I prefer zipper or drawstring? Well, I thought I would show you some of the different project bags. Your average project bag, and these are 3. I have lots of project bags, none of which I've really bought intentionally. Well, I bought one. I bought one from Hobium one time. Most of them are about the same size. And here's this one. Yeah, here you go. Here's this one. You can see it kind of I'm holding it up to my head so you can kind of see it in comparison to the size of my head. They're all pretty much the same size. Okay. They're perfect. This size is perfect for like your on-the-go knitting. If I'm doing socks or a hat, fingerless mitts, small projects, these are great for. If I'm doing something big like the sweater I'm making, it goes in let me hold it up. It goes in a tote bag. And half the time I just use old pocketbooks for something big. I never carry all of the yarn that I'm making. Like I'm making this sweater, but I don't have all of the yarn that goes in the sweater in that bag. I keep it separate because if something were to happen to some of that, I don't want to ruin all of the yarn. So, like I took this to a thing at work, and it was an outdoor event and it rained, and this fell off the table right into a puddle. Thankfully, it didn't damage anything. I mean, the bag got wet, which I was able to wash because it's just washable cotton. But I was just very thankful that I didn't have all of my yarn in there. I had the 2 skeins I was working on, and that was it. So the rest I tend to store and just pull it out as I need it. And I really don't need this big of a bag because what I've got in there is actually taking up maybe half of it. But that's what I use. So if I'm doing something big like a blanket or something, it goes in a tote bag for the most part. So of the small bags, I thought I would pull out the 3 different varieties I have. This one is a zipper. And all three of these I won. So this one I won from the Yarn and You Girl, and this is made by Stitch and You Bags. It is a zippered bag. It's cute. It's my least favorite though. Zippered bags are my least favorite, and I'll tell you why. The zippers, for some reason, you know, I end up getting the yarn getting caught, or the project getting caught in the zipper itself. And on the zipper, right at the base, so you can see this, right at the base here where the little thingy attaches right here, I have yarn, you wouldn't believe it, but this little teeny spot where it doesn't join here, I get yarn caught there all the time, which is kind of crazy, but it happens, and I'm always untangling it. So I like them, but they're not my favorite. Then there is this one, which I won from Must Love Yarn, which you can see from the thing here. This is a podcast called Must Love Yarn. Yarn and You Girl also has a podcast. And I won this from her. And this is a type that you wear over your arm, and you can knit and walk, which you know I don't do because I would hurt myself. But you do have the capability. This one is nice because you don't have to do anything fancy. You just fold it over when you're done. This is probably my second favorite. I like it because I like having the big open sides. And I like the fact that it has an outside pocket. So I like this one. It would probably be my second favorite. My all-time favorite is the good old drawstring. And this is also one that I won on a podcast. This is from Knitting by the Sea podcast. And this is, I didn't tell you where this was made. This is actually made by one of the podcasters on the show. Her name's Kelly. Her mother actually made this. So there isn't a name with this brand, but it was from Must Love Yarn by Kelly's mom. This is made by Birdie and Poppet. It is a UK-based company. And I like it. They have some kind of lining. I don't know if it feels like quilt batting in between the inside and the outside because it's soft and squishy, but there's nothing to snag my yarn up with. And I like putting balls of yarn in, whatever I'm working with, and then I can pull this partially shut. The yarn stays inside and the yarn comes right out through, you know, the little hole that I just don't tie it all the way shut. And so I can pull yarn out of it. It's not going anywhere. And, you know, it folds up easy to fit in my pocketbook. So that would be my favorite. This is my all-time favorite for smaller bags. But like I said, if I'm doing a shawl or a sweater or something, I use a tote bag. So question number 10, what is my favorite book of all time? Okay, aside from the Bible would be, this was a hard pick because as you know, I like to read lots and lots of different authors. But I guess if I had to pick a favorite one, it is a very old book. I think it's even out of print anymore. I found it years ago in some of my aunt's things. She had given it to me. And it's actually written by a relative of mine. I mean, a distant relative. And it's a book called Song of Years. It's by Beth Streeter Aldrich. It's a story about of pioneering of the state of Iowa. And so it kind of held some interest to me because my dad actually is from Iowa. His family is from out there in the Walk-On area of Iowa. And so it was about, you know, the frontier days, like I think around the 1850s. And it follows the life of this one particular family and this young man as well. So if I had to pick one, that would probably be my favorite. And like I said, it was written, I believe, in the 1930s, maybe, something like that. And so I still have a copy of it. And it was, like I said, in some of my great aunt's things. And somehow, I don't even remember how I got it. I don't know if I think she gave it to me. I don't remember. But anyway, that was probably, if I had to pick a favorite, that would be why. Because the ties to Iowa and the fact it was written by a distant relative of mine. So then we got into the funny part, because my brother, who is Dwayne, you've seen him on some of the videos before over at family gatherings and stuff. He is usually in the kitchen cooking. He and his wife and me all together. And he saw my post about asking me anything and said, oh, I could have all kinds of fun with this. Should we mention? And he started naming off all the crazy things I did when I was a kid. And then my daughter got in on it too and said, oh, Mom, don't forget, you did some funny thing, and it went on. And then Chris Bragg had to ask, one of her questions was, do you ever wish you were an only child? So, yeah. Anyway, some of my brother's little comments, if you read them, I will explain them because they wouldn't make any sense to you unless you heard the story behind it. When I was a teenager, I had this, if something was moving, I had to find out why and how it worked. And I don't know, just craziness. I should have kept my hands to myself, but I didn't. So we were in a store and there were socks on this one display case, and they had snaps, like the two little snaps, like what you can sew onto like jackets and things, so they would snap together. Great idea. They would snap together. You could put them in the wash and you didn't end up with, lost socks. Well, I had to snap them together to test it, and then I could not unsnap them again. I broke the socks. I stuck them together and they wouldn't unstick. And then, I don't remember if it was the same night or not, but we were wandering in the same store, so it might have been the same night. They were advertising blue jeans, and there was this motorized thumb, because it was called Thumbs Up Jeans. This was in a Sears, and this thumb is doing this. So I just had to go over and stop the thumb, and then I couldn't get it to start back up again. So I broke the thumb. So yes, always doing embarrassing things. And it unfortunately didn't change as I got older either. I once, about the same, I was maybe a little bit older, walked into a store, was busy chatting with a young man, and got nervous, bumped against a showcase, and knocked all the shelves down with all of the stuff on the shelf. And like I said, it didn't get better when I got older. My kids and I were in Walmart, and I loved embarrassing my children in Walmart. They were like, we don't know her. We do not know her. We were in the lawn and garden department, and the reflectors that you stick in your yard, they're like on a stick, and they have a reflector on the end. I stuck 2 of them out the side of my head like antennas, and I grabbed a sprinkler squirter thing, and I was hopping around the aisle, imitating Marvin the Martian, from Looney Tunes, going, you earthlings make me so angry. And then my kids were like totally embarrassed. And then we look up and realize the security camera is watching me. So, yes, I've gotten better. I haven't embarrassed Dave lately, I don't think. So I think he does go shopping with me, so I apparently have not embarrassed him of late. We'll say that. So that is the end of our questions for this week. Next Wednesday, I will be answering the question that Yoka asked about the Amish and in general, the plain people, which means that they live plainly. That's where the term comes from. And her question was not only about their crafts that they are involved in, but they're considered separated. But does that mean that they don't interact with people, or what does it mean by separated? So that will be next Wednesday's video. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you again on Saturday. Bye, everybody.